I want you to take a second and imagine the medicine cabinet in your bathroom. Just picture it in your mind.
We all have one of those, right?
Exactly. You open that mirrored door and you look at those little plastic bottles lined up on the shelf.
Usually taking up way too much space.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Now, how many of those bottles are the branded blockbusters? You know, the ones with the glossy television commercials and the household names.
Right, the really expensive ones.
And how many of them are the unglamorous, lower-cost, generic equivalents? Because, those are really the only things keeping the entire global healthcare system from going completely bankrupt.
It's a pretty profound ratio to think about. We fixate heavily on the breakthrough science of those branded drugs, right?
The billion-dollar research programs.
Yeah. But the sheer volume of daily healthcare, like the maintenance of chronic conditions across billions of people, is carried entirely on the shoulders of generics.
And that is exactly what we're getting into today. So welcome to the deep dive. We have a huge stack of sources to go through today.
A lot of reading for this one.
So much reading. We've got investor presentations, annual reports, market analysis, and it is all centered on a company called Señoras Pharmaceuticals Limited.
Right.
Our mission today is to decode how a relatively under-the-radar B2B pharma platform operates across 49 countries.
Which is an enormous geographic footprint.
It really is. We are looking at a company trying to balance high-margin regulated markets with high-volume emerging markets, all while planning to launch 50 new products in the next 6 to 8 quarters.
And, I mean, that is a staggering level of ambition for a company of their current size.
Definitely.
We are getting a window into the highly regulated, deeply intricate global supply chain of affordable medicines. This is like the invisible architecture of global health.
Yeah, the logistical and chemical coordination required to execute on that kind of growth is just immensely complicated.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's start with the foundational layer. We need to define what Señoras actually does.
Good place to start.
Because the sources break their business down into finished dosage forms, APIs, and CDMO services.
Right. So to understand the business model, we really need to understand the physical reality of what they are actually manufacturing.
Exactly.
It helps to view their operations through the sequential stages of drug creation. So the first element is the API, the active pharmaceutical ingredient.
Which is the core of the whole thing.
Yeah, it's the raw chemical engine that actually produces the intended medical effect in the human body. Synthesizing an API is, well, it's an exercise in intense chemical engineering.
Right.
You're starting with base chemical intermediates and running them through multiple highly controlled reactions in giant vats.
You are dealing with hazardous solvents, extreme temperatures, and really strict crystallization processes, right? Just to ensure the final powder has the exact molecular structure required.
Because if the molecular structure is off even slightly, or, if there are impurities from the solvent, the drug might not work.
Or worse, it becomes toxic.
The tolerance for deviation is essentially zero. And Señoras manufactures these core chemical engines, not just for their own use, but to sell to other pharmaceutical companies.
Oh, so they are a supplier to their own competitors in a way.
Exactly. Then you move to the second layer, which is finished dosage forms, or FDFs. This is the medicine in its final consumable state.
So the tablet, the capsule, the liquid suspension.
Right. You have to take that raw API powder and blend it with excipients.
Excipients are the inactive ingredients, right? Like the binders that hold a pill together.
Yeah, or the disintegrants that ensure it actually dissolves in the stomach, plus the coatings that protect it from moisture.
So they are functioning as both the chemical refinery making the raw fuel and the assembly plant building the final vehicle.
That's a great way to put it. And that leads to the third part of the business, which is the CDMO services.
Contract development and manufacturing organization.
Right. From my reading the sources, this is essentially renting out their scientific expertise and their factory floors.
So if another pharma company wants to bring a drug to market, but lacks the specialized equipment or the clean room capacity, they just hire Señoras to manufacture it for them.
Yeah, exactly. It is a highly strategic line of business. I mean, building a pharmaceutical manufacturing facility requires tens of millions of dollars.
And years of regulatory validation, I imagine.
Oh, absolutely. So by offering CDMO services, Señoras allows other companies to bypass that huge capital expenditure.
They provide the capacity and the technical execution for someone else's proprietary formulation.
Precisely.
But, the sources keep returning to a very specific modifier when describing Señoras' core product line. They rarely just say generics.
No, they always emphasize complex generics. generics.
Right. And I always assumed a generic drug was just a straightforward copy of a branded drug whose patent had expired. Like, you get the recipe, you make the pill, you sell it cheaper.
Yeah, a lot of people think that. But the distinction between a standard commodity generic and a complex generic is the fulcrum of their entire economic model. Well, a standard generic, like a basic ibuprofen or amoxicillin, is relatively straightforward to reverse engineer. The molecule is stable, the delivery mechanism is simple, and the regulatory pathway is very well established.
So anyone can do it.
Pretty much. Because it is technologically accessible, dozens of manufacturers can produce it.
And the moment a standard drug goes off patent, the market just floods with competitors.
Yeah, exactly. And the price plummets to the marginal cost of production. It becomes a pure commodity.
But a complex generic introduces friction into that process. A friend of mine in the industry once described making a standard generic as cutting a standard house key.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, almost any hardware store can do it if they have the blank. But a complex generic is more like reverse engineering a biometric bank vault.
That analogy gets right to the heart of the mechanical and chemical difficulty. Let's look at what makes a generic complex.
Okay.
Often, it is the delivery mechanism itself. So if a drug is a dry powder inhaler for asthma, the chemical API is really only half the battle.
Because you actually have to get it into the lungs.
Right. The inhaler device itself must aerosolize that powder into particles that are exactly 2 to 5 microns in size.
Wow, that is incredibly specific.
It has to be. If the particles are too large, they hit the back of the throat and never reach the lungs. If they're too small, the patient just exhales them right back out.
So the fluid dynamics of the plastic device are as critical and probably as heavily scrutinized by regulators as the actual drug.
Oh, 100%.
I imagine time-release formulations fall into this category too, where you can't just have the pill dissolve instantly, right? It has to degrade over a 12-hour period.
Yeah, time-release matrices are notoriously difficult. You are essentially embedding the active ingredient inside a polymer web.
And that web must slowly erode in the digestive tract at a highly specific rate.
Exactly, regardless of whether the patient just ate a heavy meal or has a completely empty stomach. It's incredibly hard to engineer.
And then there's the testing part. Furthermore, proving to the regulator that your generic version is bioequivalent to the branded drug is scientifically arduous.
Very much so.
Bioequivalence. This is where they have to prove the generic acts the exact same way in the bloodstream as the expensive brand name, right?
Yes, they have to conduct in vivo clinical trials on healthy volunteers. They administer the generic, draw blood over several days, and map the plasma concentration curve.
So they're tracking exactly how much of the drug is in the blood at any given hour.
Right. The peak concentration and the total area under the curve must match the branded drug within an incredibly tight statistical confidence interval.
And with a complex drug, maybe one that is highly insoluble or absorbs erratically, hitting that exact bioequivalence target can require years of formulation adjustments.
Yeah, it's an iterative, agonizing process.
So the complexity is the barrier. It requires advanced analytical chemistry and highly customized manufacturing.
And most generic companies simply don't have the technical talent or the capital to even attempt it.
And because fewer companies attempt it, the ones that do succeed face significantly less competition.
Right. It secure actual pricing power. They aren't trapped in that race to the bottom.
And this dynamic is playing out against a backdrop of profound structural tailwinds. I mean, we're looking at an aging global population with a rising prevalence of chronic diseases.
Concurrently, there is a constant, inevitable wave of drug patents expiring.
Right, the patent cliff.
Every single year, billions of dollars of branded pharmaceutical sales lose their exclusivity.
So the off-patent market is continually replenished. And whether it is a patient paying out of pocket or a national health system trying to manage an exploding budget, the demand for these lower-cost alternatives is a permanent fixture.
It is a structural necessity for the modern world. But the return on the engineering investment required to make these complex generics is wildly asymmetrical, depending on where in the world the drug is actually sold.
This is where the numbers in the financial reports get really fascinating. Seniori's employs what the sources call a dual-engine strategy.
Right, they split their focus.
Yeah, they split their focus between highly regulated markets like the US, the UK, Canada, and then emerging markets. Let's look at the financial year 25 figures.
The numbers are stark.
They really are. In the regulated markets, their revenue reached 244.8 crore rupees, which was up 69% year over year.
A very healthy growth rate.
But the defining metric is the EBITDA margin in those regulated markets. It hit 38.4%.
Which is incredible. An operating margin approaching 40% in physical manufacturing indicates immense pricing power and a highly protected product mix.
But then you flip over to their emerging markets business, the revenue there was 121.2 crore rupees.
And it's growing incredibly fast, up 174%.
Right, but the EBITDA margin in the emerging markets was only 7.0%.
Yeah.
We are looking at a 31.4% margin gap simply based on geography.
And that disparity is entirely driven by the regulatory barrier to entry we were just discussing.
The complex generic moat.
Exactly. In markets governed by the US FDA or the UK's MHRA, the compliance requirements are so rigorous and the cost of submission is so high that the market naturally self-selects.
It weeds out the smaller players.
Right. It only allows the most capitalized and technically proficient companies to play. When Señores manages to launch a complex product in the US, they might be one of only 3 approved suppliers in the entire country.
Which allows them to hold the line on pricing. Whereas the emerging markets operate with a totally different structural reality.
The emerging markets are heavily volume-driven and highly fragmented. The regulatory hurdles, while improving, are generally much lower.
This allows a multitude of smaller, local manufacturers to enter the fray with standard generics.
And the competitive dynamic shifts from technical superiority to aggressive price discounting just to win distribution scale.
So if I'm looking at a spreadsheet where one market yields a 38% profit and the other yields 7%, my immediate reaction is to abandon the 7% market entirely.
It seems obvious, right?
Yeah. It seems counterintuitive to dedicate factory space to a low-margin product when you could theoretically be churning out high-margin pills for the U.S.
On a pure margin basis, that logic holds up perfectly. But it fundamentally misunderstands the hidden operational mechanics and fixed costs of running a global pharmaceutical factory.
Okay, break that down for us.
The emerging markets serve a highly strategic purpose. They are the volume layer.
Walk us through the economics of the factory floor. Why is that volume actually necessary?
Consider the overhead required to maintain an FDA-approved facility. You have multi-million-dollar HVAC systems driving pristine air through HEPA filters into clean rooms.
Right, it's not a normal warehouse.
No, not at all. You have continuous loops of highly purified water running 24 hours a day to prevent microbial growth.
And you have dedicated quality assurance teams reviewing thousands of pages of batch records.
Exactly. And all those costs are fixed. They do not decrease if you run your tablet presses at 30% capacity.
You can't just turn the clean room off on the weekends to save electricity.
Oh, definitely not. If you shut down the air handling, you have to spend weeks revalidating the sterility of the room before you can make another pill.
Wow. The infrastructure must run continuously. So if Señores only produce high-margin complex generics for the U.S., they might not have enough approved products to keep those machines running at full utilization.
Right, and then the fixed overhead would disproportionately eat into the profits of those U.S. drugs.
So the strategy is to utilize every single second of idle machine time to churn out drugs for the emerging markets.
Precisely. Even at a 7% margin, every single pill produced absorbs a fraction of that enormous fixed factory overhead.
The emerging market volume effectively subsidizes the baseline cost of the facility.
It drives down the per-unit cost across the entire organization. Furthermore, it provides a crucial operational hedge.
How so?
Well, regulated markets are notoriously volatile. A sudden regulatory query can delay a key product launch by 18 months. Or a competitor might suddenly slash prices on your most profitable drug.
Ah, I see. The emerging markets provide a steady, high-velocity stream of cash flow that keeps the enterprise moving while they navigate the higher-stakes battles in the U.S.
Exactly. It's a foundational safety net.
And there is a nuance to their emerging market strategy, particularly in India. The sources highlight a pivot toward branded generics,
Right.
which, to someone outside the industry, kind of sounds like an oxymoron. It's either a brand or a generic, right?
Yeah, the dynamic in the Indian pharmaceutical market is very distinct.
Yeah.
Rather than a system where a doctor prescribes a chemical molecule and the pharmacist fulfills it with whichever generic is cheapest.
Which is what happens in the U.S.
Right. In India, Indian doctors frequently prescribe generics by a specific brand name created by the manufacturer.
Oh, interesting. So Señoras is building brand identities for their generic formulations and marketing them directly to physicians.
Yes, so they have medical representatives visiting clinics, educating doctors on the reliability and quality of their specific version of the drug.
And the sources note this specific branded generic segment for Señoras in India grew more than tenfold year on year in the second quarter of financial year 26.
A huge leap. By establishing brand loyalty among prescribers, they are slowly carving out pricing power in a market that is otherwise heavily commoditized.
They are basically trying to inch that 7% margin upward.
That's the goal. It is a long-term play for margin expansion within the volume layer.
Yeah.
But, to protect the core profit engine, those lucrative 38% margins in the regulated markets, Señoras relies on an architecture of defense that operates entirely out of public view.
The invisible fortress.
Yes.
Because if you look at their consumer presence, it is virtually non-existent. B2B pharmaceutical manufacturing does not rely on Super Bowl commercials.
Not at all. Their actual moats are technical, regulatory, and institutional. Let's examine the crown jewel of their defense, the regulatory moat.
The sources constantly emphasize their U.S. FDA-approved manufacturing facilities.
In the global pharmaceutical trade, an FDA-approved plant is the ultimate delineator between a regional player and a Tier 1 global supplier.
The rigor required to achieve and maintain that status seems difficult to overstate. We hear about FDA approval constantly, but what are the actual mechanics of an inspection?
It's intense.
What is an investigator looking for when they walk into a plant in India?
The inspection process is totally forensic. They are not merely testing a sample of the finished pills to see if they contain the right ingredient.
That's what I would have assumed.
Most people do.
Yeah.
But they actually deconstruct the entire quality management system. They examine the provenance of the raw materials. They review the calibration logs of the analytical scales in the laboratory.
Wow. They will look at the gowning procedures of the operators entering the sterile zones, right?
Yes, every detail. And the data integrity focus is incredibly intense now. The regulators aren't just looking at the final test results.
What else are they looking for?
They want to see the digital audit trails of the chromatography machines to ensure no one ran a test, saw a failing result, deleted it, and ran it again until it passed.
Oh, wow. They are looking for hidden failures.
Data integrity is paramount. The FDA operates on the principle that if it wasn't documented correctly, it didn't happen.
Building a facility and a corporate culture capable of withstanding that level of adversarial scrutiny must require huge capital investment.
Massive amounts of capital and years of cultural conditioning for the staff. The moat exists because the vast majority of smaller generic manufacturers simply cannot afford the compliance overhead.
They are structurally locked out of the U.S. market, and Señoras has managed to navigate this successfully. The data shows 19 ANDAs.
Abbreviated new drug applications.
Right, and 21 commercialized products in the U.S. and Canada. They have secured their position inside the fortress.
And once you are in, you benefit from a secondary defense mechanism, institutional switching costs.
The friction of bureaucracy actually becomes a profound competitive advantage. Señoras is not selling individual bottles to patients.
No, they are selling vast quantities of drugs through complex distribution channels to massive hospital networks and national health systems.
Okay, so if I am the procurement director for a national health system, and I'm currently buying a critical injectable drug from Señoras, I have already validated their quality. I know they deliver on time.
Right.
If a new, unproven generic manufacturer approaches me and offers the exact same molecule for 5% less, the rational economic move seems to be to switch and save the money.
The unit economics might look appealing, sure, but the administrative and operational costs of switching are just prohibitive.
Because changing a critical supplier in a highly regulated healthcare environment initiates a whole cascade of validations.
Exactly. The hospital's quality assurance team must audit the new supplier's regulatory history. Legal departments must draft new indemnification contracts.
Pharmacy committees have to review and approve the new formulation, ensuring it is compatible with their existing IV delivery systems.
It's a logistical nightmare. And there's the underlying human element, too. Career risk.
Right. If I switch suppliers to, say, 5%, and the new manufacturer suffers a contamination issue that leads to a stockout in our emergency rooms, the consequences are catastrophic.
Both for the patients and for your career. The institutional buyer is inherently risk-averse. They value supply chain continuity and proven regulatory compliance far more than marginal cost savings on a generic drug.
Unless Señoras gives them a compelling reason to leave, such as a major quality failure or a chronic inability to supply, the hospital network is structurally incentivized to maintain the status quo.
The switching costs create a highly sticky revenue stream.
So management has built this regulatory fortress, and they have these sticky institutional relationships. The next phase of their strategy, as detailed in the sources, is to push a startling volume of new products through this established infrastructure.
The growth play.
Exactly. We are looking at a growth playbook that outlines launching 50 products over the next 6 to 8 quarters.
To contextualize that timeline, 6 to 8 quarters is merely 18 to 24 months.
They are attempting to scale from roughly 20 current commercialized products to 70.
It's incredible.
It's a new product launch every couple of weeks. It is a fundamental transformation of the company's operational footprint.
The strategy to execute this seems to be built on 4 distinct pillars of expansion. Let's look at how these pillars interlock.
Sounds good.
The primary engine is the expansion of their ANDA pipeline. They are directing their research and development capital toward identifying new complex drugs that are nearing patent expiration.
Formulating the generic equivalents and aggressively pushing those dossiers through the FDA approval process.
Yes, this requires a profound acceleration in their R&D velocity.
And while they are building out their own product portfolio, they're simultaneously leaning into the CDMO scale-up.
Right, the contract manufacturer.
As they expand their manufacturing footprint to accommodate these 50 new products, they will inevitably have periods of excess capacity. They intend to market that FDA-approved floor space to competitors and partners.
It ensures the machines never stop running, maximizing that absorption of fixed cost we discussed earlier.
The third element is geographic deepening, specifically in emerging markets and India.
They are taking the branded generic model that is proving successful in India and attempting to replicate it across the other 48 countries in their network.
As healthcare infrastructure formalizes in these regions, establishing brand dominance early can yield long-term pricing leverage.
Exactly. And the fourth pillar is where the institutional switching costs become a growth engine. It's all about wallet share.
So if Señors is already an approved, trusted vendor supplying 20 products to a large hospital network, the friction to sell them product number 21 is significantly lower than acquiring a new customer entirely.
Right. They are leveraging their existing distribution pathways to cross-sell the expanded portfolio.
The strategy is intellectually sound. It maximizes the value of their existing regulatory and distribution assets. However, executing this level of expansion requires physical infrastructure.
You cannot launch 50 complex pharmaceutical products through sheer organizational will. You need steel in the ground.
The CapEx, the capital expenditure, is the reality check here. You need new bioreactors, new tableting presses, new blister packaging lines.
The sources indicate Señores is deploying capital heavily. They are investing in high-tech manufacturing in the U.S., but crucially, they also acquired an asset in India that already possessed U.S. FDA approval.
That acquisition strategy is highly revealing. Building a state-of-the-art facility from the ground up and guiding it through its initial FDA inspection can take 3 to 5 years.
Yeah, it's not quick. By acquiring an already approved facility, Señores is essentially buying time. They are securing immediate manufacturing capacity to support that aggressive 18 to 24-month launch window.
And this brings us to the financial reality of the business model. Expanding factories, running huge clinical trials for bioequivalence, and acquiring assets requires tremendous amounts of capital.
It's incredibly capital intensive.
The surface numbers for Señores look exceptional, but there is a structural tension hidden in the balance sheet.
The financial narrative is really defined by 2 opposing forces. You have the sheer power of operating leverage, and then the relentless drag of working capital requirements.
Let's examine the operating leverage first, because it explains the explosive profit growth. In financial year 25, the total income grew by 91%.
A great top-line number.
But the EBITDA, the core operating profit, more than doubled, reaching 109 crore rupees. This represents a 148% increase in profit.
Wow.
Their EBITDA margin expanded by 640 basis points, reaching 27% overall.
Profit growing significantly faster than revenue is the textbook definition of operating leverage playing out in a continuous manufacturing environment.
And it tracks perfectly with the concept of fixed versus variable costs that we talked about earlier.
Right, because the cost of maintaining the clean rooms, the quality assurance staff, and the regulatory infrastructure is largely fixed. The cost of producing the next incremental batch of pills is exceptionally low.
The raw API and the packaging materials are really just a fraction of the total facility cost.
Exactly. As Señores pushes higher volumes of their new products through the existing infrastructure, the fixed costs are distributed across a much wider base.
Therefore, a much larger percentage of every incremental dollar of revenue drops directly to the bottom line.
This mechanical reality is why management is projecting a steady-state EBITDA margin of 29 to 31% as they scale up.
The operating leverage is the engine, but the working capital is the friction. Because while the profit and loss statement shows explosive growth, the balance sheet reveals where the cash is actually going.
Growth in physical manufacturing is ferociously expensive.
The critical vulnerability for rapidly scaling export businesses is the accumulation of receivables.
Yes, the working capital trap.
The sources indicate that while Señores generated 31.4 crore rupees in operating cash flow during the first half of financial year 26, their receivables surged by 162%.
Reaching 325 crore rupees.
Receivables represent money owed to the company for goods already delivered. The dynamic here is tied to the physical supply chain.
Let me walk you through how that works in practice.
Please do.
When Señores manufactures a batch of drugs in India and loads it onto a cargo ship bound for the United States, they recognize the revenue on their income statement. The profit is booked.
Right away.
Right away. But the actual cash doesn't arrive until the product clears customs, enters the distributor's warehouse, is sold to the hospital, and the hospital finally pays the invoice.
The cash conversion cycle can easily stretch to 90 or 120 days.
Easily. When a company's growing revenue at 91%, they are constantly initiating new manufacturing runs, purchasing raw materials, and paying labor costs.
All while waiting months to be compensated for their previous shipments.
The faster they grow, the more cash becomes trapped in inventory and receivables. They have to continuously fund the creation of the next 50 products while waiting for the cash flow from the first 20.
It is a precarious tightrope.
The tension between paper profits and the liquidity required to sustain operations is constant. If a major international distributor delays payment, or if there is a sudden spike in the cost of raw materials, the cash buffer can evaporate rapidly.
Which transitions us to the broader risk profile of the company. When you are operating a highly complex, capital-intensive manufacturing platform across 49 countries, the vulnerabilities are hyper-specific.
We aren't talking about macroeconomic risks like a consumer recession here. The demand for essential medicine is largely inelastic.
People always need their meds. The risks here are operational and regulatory.
In the pharmaceutical sector, regulatory risk is the absolute apex threat. The FDA possesses the authority to unilaterally halt a company's revenue stream overnight.
The vocabulary of FDA enforcement is ever present in the risk factors of these sources. We see terms like Form 483s, warning letters, and import alerts.
They are terrifying words for anyone in pharma.
Let's trace the anatomy of a regulatory failure. What happens when the system breaks down?
A Form 483 is issued at the conclusion of an inspection if the investigator observes conditions that they believe violate the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act.
So what does that look like in reality?
It could stem from a minor procedural deviation, such as an incomplete equipment cleaning log, or it could be something systemic, like an inadequate investigation into an out-of-specification test result in the laboratory.
Oh, so if a batch of API fails a purity test, you can't just throw it away and test a new batch.
No, definitely not. You have to launch a formal investigation into exactly why the failure occurred to ensure the underlying process isn't flawed.
Exactly. And if the FDA feels the company's response to a 483 is inadequate, or if the violations are severe, they escalate to a warning letter.
A warning letter is a formal notification demanding immediate, comprehensive remediation.
It signals to the market and to purchasing hospitals that the facility's quality systems are deeply suspect.
And the ultimate sanction is the import alert.
An import alert is catastrophic. It means the FDA has concluded the facility operates below acceptable standards, and all products manufactured there are automatically detained at the U.S. border.
Revenue from that facility drops to zero instantaneously. Remediation involves hiring expensive third-party consultants, overhauling quality systems, and waiting months or years for the FDA to return for a re-inspection.
The sources explicitly note that this is a persistent industry-wide risk. Compliance is a daily, relentless operational discipline.
A single lapse by an operator on the floor can trigger an inspectional cascade that wipes out that 38% regulated margin.
The second major vulnerability is input cost and supply chain volatility. Señores controls the final synthesis and formulation, but they are dependent on a global web of suppliers for base chemical intermediates and raw materials.
It is analogous to an automotive assembly line. A car manufacturer might have the most advanced robotics in the world, but if a supplier in another hemisphere fails to deliver a specific microchip, the entire assembly line halts.
Right. The draft red herring prospectus highlights Señora's increasing reliance on third-party suppliers, often concentrated in specific geographic regions like China.
The chemical supply chain is highly sensitive to geopolitical friction, environmental regulations in source countries, and logistical bottlenecks.
If the price of a critical intermediate spikes, Señoras cannot simply pass that cost onto the hospital networks immediately, as those prices are often locked into long-term contracts.
Right, the margin just has to absorb the impact.
We also have to consider the human element, specifically key person risk and organizational strain. The corporate structure is promoter-led,
Driven by a tight-knit leadership team.
including Managing Director Swapnil Jatinpai Shah, CFO Deval Rajnikant Shah, and COO Chetan Bipinchandra Shah.
Scaling from a successful regional player to a global platform with 70 products requires a fundamental shift in management architecture. A centralized, promoter-led structure can become a bottleneck during hypergrowth.
The challenge is pushing that uncompromising culture of quality and compliance down to the middle management layer.
The plant managers, the shift supervisors, the quality control analysts.
If the organizational structure strains under the sheer volume of new product launches, the risk of a regulatory misstep increases exponentially.
The sources mention formal succession policies, but operational execution relies on deep bench strength. The final risk to consider is the nature of their competitive advantage itself.
Right, the barrier to entry for complex generics is high, but it is not impenetrable.
It is an illusion of permanence. We established that formulating a complex time-release matrix or an aerosolized inhaler is exceptionally difficult, keeping competitors at bay and margins high.
But science continuously advances. Analytical equipment becomes more precise. Reverse engineering techniques improve.
Eventually, a second, third, and fourth competitor will decipher the formulation, navigate the bioequivalence trials, and secure FDA approval.
And when multiple players enter the market, the pricing power evaporates. The high-margin product slowly commoditizes.
To maintain their profit profile, Señoras is essentially trapped on a treadmill of innovation.
They must continually launch new, increasingly difficult, complex products to replace the margins that are eroding on their older portfolio.
The 50-product pipeline isn't just about growth. It is about survival against the inevitable gravity of generic price erosion.
It demands relentless execution across R&D, regulatory affairs, and manufacturing simultaneously.
It's a huge undertaking.
Bringing this entire analysis of Señoras together, we are looking at an entity attempting to master extreme operational complexity.
They are leveraging the immense profitability of highly regulated markets to fund expansion, while using the volume of emerging markets to absorb the crushing fixed costs of pharmaceutical manufacturing.
They are attempting to double their commercial footprint in 2 years without fracturing their quality systems or running out of working capital.
It is a master class in global supply chain economics and regulatory navigation. The tightropes they walk, between cash and profit, between scale and compliance, are universally applicable to any heavy manufacturing industry, but with the added stakes of global human health.
And this directly impacts you, the listener. The next time you are at the pharmacy counter, paying a fraction of the original price for a generic prescription, consider the invisible architecture required to produce it.
You are holding the output of years of chemical engineering, millions of dollars in pristine manufacturing infrastructure, intricate global supply chains spanning multiple continents, and thousands of pages of regulatory audits.
The affordability of that daily medication is an extraordinary logistical achievement.
It truly is.
But I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over, building on the mechanics we've explored today.
Okay, what is it?
We have detailed how the immense cost and rigor of FDA compliance acts as a necessary moat to ensure the safety of our drug supply. But as medicines become increasingly complex and the regulatory barriers become astronomically expensive to clear, fewer and fewer companies can afford to compete.
It narrows the field.
Right. So if the cost of compliance forces the generic market to consolidate into just a handful of very large, highly capitalized players, do the regulations designed to protect us ultimately create generic monopolies that destroy the very affordability they were meant to enable?
Wow. It is the fundamental paradox of modern pharmaceutical regulation. We demand absolute safety, but the economic reality of proving that safety may ultimately restrict access.
It's something to think about. Keep questioning the hidden structures and economics of the everyday items around you.
Right.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.